You're about to meet the innovators and influencers who are restoring the Judeo-Christian foundations of our culture right here on The Patrick Coffin Show.
And now, here's your host, Patrick Coffin.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to the show where we talk about recovering the Judeo-Christian roots of our culture. We talk about repairing the DNA damage done along the way to what we call the American experiment and the West. Thanks so much for hanging out. You'll be really glad that you did, because today we're going to be talking about something that every single person watching and listening right now has in common. You ready? That is that this life is a testing ground. It is not permanent. This human life is not our true home. Tennessee Williams put it this way in an essay in the New York Times: the clock's only monosyllable is loss, 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 unless we set our hearts to its opposition. Put another way by Jim Morrison: nobody gets out of here alive. Our guest today has an unusual but extremely important story to tell and also service to offer. His name is Marcus Daly, and Marcus and his wife Kelly moved from downtown Seattle to Vashon Island with their baby daughter in September of the year 2001. When they witnessed the funeral of Pope John Paul II in 2005, it affected them more deeply than they expected, particularly the sight of his simple wooden casket, which I also remember. St. John Paul the Great played a powerful role in their lives and in the rejuvenation of their faith. Marcus founded an organization called Marian Caskets to be of help to God's people and to their families as they pass from this life to the next, inspired by the life and the very public death of Pope John Paul II the Great. Marcus Daly of MarianCaskets.com. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Patrick. Great to be with you.
As a coffin, I appreciate the casket construction. It just gels very well, I think.
Do people ever call you Patrick Casket by accident?
You know, Marcus, no one's ever mentioned my name in that way, ever. Never. Just a billion. So all my friends are chuckling now that I'm interviewing a casket maker. Let me torment you a little bit, as I do many of my guests, for not seeing the film Departures, the 2008 Japanese film, winner of the Best Foreign Film Oscar. It's based on the memoirs of a guy. The memoirs are called Coffin Man. It took 15 years to make this movie, but it'll be right up your alley. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes over at patrickcoffin.net. Excuse me, patrickcoffin.media, the show website. So let's start with the beginning if we can. I remember being affected by it was like an oblique camera shot down on John Paul II's casket, and I remember then Cardinal Ratzinger, who celebrated his funeral, he was praying over the casket, and I remember wind blowing the page one by one by one. I thought that's just so beautiful, a symbol of, the chapters of his life coming to a close at his funeral. It was very, very moving to me. Yeah. Obviously, it affected you as well. Is that kind of the origin of Marian Caskets?
It is. It didn't. The next day, I wasn't out building caskets, but before that, I had learned boat building. I had worked in a boat shop in Seattle, and when Kelly and I moved out here, we thought we'd have this little idyllic life on an island, building simple wooden boats for people and raising our one or two children. But we found that not that many people really wanted to shell out $10,000 or $15,000 for a 12-foot wooden boat that I just spent my idyllic life massaging in my shop. So we found other ways to make money for a while, but I still had those skills and that desire to do something with my hands. And so there was this confluence of what I know how to do with my hands and what I experienced with my heart there at his funeral that percolated for a few years before I actually started doing this. I brought the idea sort of haltingly to Kelly that what if we built caskets, because it sort of seemed pretty strange at the time. And she thought it sounded like a great idea. And so there's been a lot of challenges and struggles along the way, because I was very naive about the whole funeral industry and the way that works. But it's been just a rich and blessed line of work, and getting to just put my whole heart and faith into what I do is pretty awesome. And the conversations I get to have with the people and the families I get to know has been really gratifying.
So you're now, in a way, building boats to cross the river Styx. I'm sure you've heard that before. There's something symbolic about caskets. I remember when I was a kid, I was terrified by my own name. I remember being at the funeral of one of my grandfathers, And it was creepy to me that my name was that horrific, unnaturally shiny box with that weird crinoline material and this corpse in it. Now I've just sort of embraced it, and it's helped me, among other things, live in the present moment. But the casket is a kind of a womb symbol, isn't it? It appears permanent, but the tomb of our Lord also seemed permanent. There's a kind of a nesting that happens with the body. There's a kind of a care that we take because our bodies were, when we were alive, the temples of the Holy Spirit. I want to get your thoughts on first of all, the material that goes into this. Are they all the same kind of wood, the caskets that you make?
I make them out of pine and I make them out of oak. At first I was just making them out of pine. And it's a little bit more rustic looking with the knots and things in there. And then there were some people who were happy to have the simplicity that I was building, but that was still just a little bit too rustic. So I make them out of oak for a little bit more formal appearance to them. But either way, they're very much wood, which I appreciate more than metal for caskets, because after all, wood was the instrument of our salvation, and it's just rich with its own personality and distinctness. So, yeah.
Do you make urns for cremations as well, or no?
I never have, because I so much want to. I mean, the church allows cremation, but it's becoming kind of the default for us because of the expense largely, but also I find because of the convenience of it. There's actually a statistic that the majority of the people who are cremated, at least in the Pacific Northwest, are actually more well off than the people who choose burial. And I think that has to do with sort of more of a cultural traditions, which maybe immigrant groups or people who have, more recently come to this country still kind of hold on to those traditions more than people who have been here for a while and who have made their way. So that's an interesting thing. But the main reason I don't build urns is just that there are plenty of people making urns out there, and I'm being shaped by this work at the same time that I'm doing it. And I really want to go deep into what does it mean that we have a body? What is it, the relationship of our body and soul? And there's just something that's abstracts that with cremation. I've had family members who've been cremated, and we've traveled to different states to inter their ashes, and it has allowed a unnatural or maybe even an unhealthy, in my case, kind of light attitude toward what we were doing. It was because it was so much more abstract to have this little box with ashes in it. So, thinking about Pope John Paul II, his theology of the body, which is largely about, sex and marriage, the way we understand it, but it's also so rich in the idea of what is a dead body? What is the significance of our body? What does it mean to honor the body and to see the body through to its final resting place? So for all those reasons, because I only have so much time, I really wanted to focus on this so that I could be shaped by the contemplation of that while I'm doing the work.
I think that's a wise choice for a number of reasons. I shared with you a link to Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, which is it's a very important book because it lays its finger on something that our culture is afflicted by, and that is just a widespread, if not denial, Marcus, euphemization and covering over. We put makeup on our bodies, and I think what's driving the movement toward making cremation more popular is that you don't have to face it. It becomes an abstraction instead of there is the remains of my loved one. Now I must say goodbye. I can't shunt it away. It's that's like the kind of ghost in the cellar or the ceiling, the attic, pick your metaphor, that comes home and it makes you see things in their proper light. Because a lot of people, we, starting with me, we live as though tomorrow is owed to us.
Right.
The preciousness that the frame of life and death give us is gone if you take away the frame called death. Then we just have, as Peter Crave says in his book, I think it's Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Heaven, but Were Afraid to Ask. There's a chapter on why heaven is not boring. And now you know what it is? It's another book. I'm happy to throw people at Peter Crave books, but it's called Love is Stronger Than Death. And
that's a great book.
So you know the metaphor of a great work of art, let's say The Last Supper. You go to the museum and there it is, and then what if you took the frame away on the sides, and to the left and to the right of our Lord's Last Supper was the Sea of Galilee, and then a lake, and then the Mediterranean, and then off to the east you've got Mesopotamia. It wouldn't be a beautiful work of art but for that frame, and death becomes that frame for us. So talk a little bit about how your work has affected you, and as you craft these beautiful caskets. It's got to make you think about every moment is slipping by. Back to the Tennessee Williams quote, right? Loss, loss, loss.
Yeah. You'd hope after doing this for 8 years that I would have some real great mystical insights and some powers over death, but I'm still just as poor as everybody else, unfortunately. But it has been rich. And what you're saying about the avoidance of death and the price that we pay for that is so true. And it's no wonder. I mean, it's awful. It's terrible to contemplate. It's terrible to have to experience this, that we all do, and we have no authority to speak on it until we've actually gone through it, and we can't speak on it once we've gone through it. So It's just amazingly individual and hard. So I used to, when I started doing this, I thought one of the things I could bring to the culture would be a recognition that time is passing by, and sort of the memento mori aspect of what I was doing. And I was a little bit arrogant, thinking that I could, because I can see, like anybody, all the price we pay for ignoring the fact that we're mortal and that time is passing by, and that we treat ourselves and each other and our environment like it's just going to be around forever, and we have there's nothing really to worry about, and all our worries ultimately spring from this one great worry. So I had this I'll kind of remind the culture we're all going to die. Well, then I realized how weak I am in the face of that myself, and it didn't feel like I had a lot of ground to stand on to go around other people. So I'm very sympathetic with that, but at the same time, how can we gently and maybe even beautifully be a witness to that? And it all comes from our faith. It all comes from God. There's just nothing. We have nothing to offer really in the face of this, and in our mortal animality. So
come on, Marcus. We bring our sins to the equation.
Right.
Can
we have something to make it worse, so we don't have anything to make it better.
I hear that. I wanted folks to see at least the side of one of your creations there. Can you tilt to your right a little bit? Because less folks think we're talking about plain boxes. They're beautifully engraved with handles. There's Jesus, I trust in you. Do you have standard biblical or sayings from the saints? Do you take quote requests? How does that part work?
Yeah, I've done some prayers and some quotes that people have. One was for a war hero in Phoenix, or in Scottsdale, he was a Korean war veteran, and he asked me to carve in the side of it, "God, thank you for all the wonderful adventures you've given me on and above planet Earth." So that was one of the more unique ones. But when I started doing it, I was just building simple wooden caskets, no prayers carved in them or anything like that. Yep. And my idea was that I could do something very environmentally friendly, going off of what I saw at Pope John Paul II's. And this would be maybe a way that I could speak to kind of people who had more of an environmentalist bent, but less of a Catholic worldview, and show them some common ground and some appreciation for just the reality and the simplicity and the way that God has ordained, or as somebody else might say, nature has ordained life and death to work. But I heard a lot of that's really cool, man, but my ashes I'm going to be cremated, and my ashes are going to be scattered on the Puget Sound or on Mount Rainier.
Dude at the end of the sentence.
Yeah, there's a man at the beginning and a dude at the end, I think. Yeah, book ended. So I was doing that for a while, but my faith is such a huge part of why I'm doing this, and even just my life in general, and what I'm thinking about, what I'm reading while I'm doing this work. So I thought, well, what if I could say something, give people an opportunity to give faith the last word in some way by carving a prayer into the casket. And the one that just kind of came to me most strongly as I was thinking about the possibilities of what I might put in there was something from the Chaplet of Divine Mercy and from the Divine Mercy message, because what I wanted to do is for people, especially for family and friends maybe who are fallen away, who come to our funerals, is take that opportunity, really, because when we're at a funeral, sure, we're thinking about the sadness of that person, but we're also confronting the crisis of our own mortality so strongly. So what do people need more than anything if they're separated from God for whatever reasons, and it largely, the separation, the gulf grows because of our own sinfulness. Mm-hmm. So I know in my own life and my own kind of adult reversion to the faith, it was a recognition, a very palpable recognition of God's merciful love that allowed me to even look at myself with some sense of who I really was and how I really lived. And so the message of divine mercy combined with the funeral seemed to me a way to really invite people back into the heart of God and into the heart of the church. So that's why I started carving Jesus, I trust in you. And then frequently on the side, I have Holy God, Holy Mighty One, Holy Immortal One, have mercy on us. So that's kind of, it's very often now, when I started doing it, a lot of people would say, can you carve this and could you carve that? But very frequently now, people will say, I want the message of divine mercy on the casket.
That's beautiful, Marcus, because people walking into a funeral are often, even if they're in the faith, they're vulnerable, they're hurt, they're scared. And there it is. It's, instead of this shiny corporate-looking casket, there's this wooden, earthy thing with a hand-carved message. I think it takes advantage in the good sense of an evangelical moment for people. Even it's a non-discursive, it's not like you're giving a homily, just that simple sign I think is really powerful. What about dealing with family members in which the deceased was very faith-filled and the family not so much? Because you're really not dealing with the deceased, you're dealing with the aftermath, right? It's like pediatricians don't deal with kids, they deal with parents.
Right, that's true. Yeah, well, I will get calls fairly often from people who are old or who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and they'll call me to set something up ahead of time, or even younger people who just want to have that. And I think that sometimes is because of that. People will see that as an opportunity to say, this is who I am, this is what I want to say, so I can kind of ensure that, even if, and I've heard lots of stories from priests, unfortunately, of family members coming in and saying, like, what's the minimal thing we can do to kind of fulfill our parents' or our grandparents' wishes here, which is so terrible. Yeah. But that said, like you were saying, when we're vulnerable, when somebody has died, when we go to a funeral, I see that vulnerability amidst the family members too, who are talking to me, because I wonder about that. How can I best communicate to people in those moments? How can I share the faith in a way that will speak to them wherever they are? And I'm usually surprised by how that vulnerability manifests itself with an openness to somebody who might scoff in a conversation at a coffee shop. Yeah. Not in a scoffing frame of mind when they're talking to me anyway.
Mm-hmm. So someone who is diagnosed beforehand will call you. I don't want to get gallows humor here, but is there a fitting? Do you take measurements? No.
People ask me that. Is it one size fits all?
Yeah, thank you.
It's one size fits most, but I've built some that are really large if somebody's really tall or really heavy, but then I've also had to build quite a few that are very small, which is, often. But people will contact me ahead of time, and it's been a huge blessing for me and for my family. And we've had lots of people come out to Vashon. They take the ferry ride out and come and see my work and talk to me and tell me what they'd like, and then meet my children. And we have 7, God willing, our 8th child will be with us on terra firma next January, and it's a very lively place out here. And so the combination of the reality of somebody's dying with just the unquenchable enthusiasm of just my kids running around and things is like it's pretty profound, and it's been very good for them, I think, to get to see that people. We're talking about avoiding death and the culture's avoidance of death. Well, it's sensible to avoid anything that's dangerous or that's scary. I mean, that's helps us survive in many, many ways. The thing that we don't see is that when we're actually faced with these things, like when we contemplate being faced with these things, it's too terrifying because it's still abstract. We're not in it. And so God's grace isn't there yet. It's not needed there yet. It's just us conjuring up the worst possible fears. But when people are actually in it, you get to see that they have this strength. And it doesn't necessarily give me strength or my children strength, but it shows again and again and again that somehow or another, the unfaceable is faced, and it's faced with courage and humor frequently, and even joy. So much depending on how people have lived or how they are living at that time. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot we can equip ourselves with along the way. Yeah. So that's been a huge blessing for us.
So they meet you and interact with your family, and it sounds like a very, kind of holy, chaotic, that's where the action is, quite a contrast to the business that you're in, which is a lovely contrast, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always certain of the chaos, and I suspect there's holiness there too because of the way it pans out.
I remember my wife and I lost a baby girl 7 years ago. She was 15 days old, and we would have very kind people tell us, how are you guys doing? You're so strong. I felt the opposite of strong. I felt mortally weak.
Yeah.
But they were also not receiving the graces that we were receiving. God gives the strength and the power that people need when they need it, to the degree to which they need it, if they have eyes to see.
Yes.
So I think that's an important point, that people outside that maelstrom of the trial don't get that you are being taken care of.
Yeah.
In the midst of the one thing that no parent can really finally protect their children or anyone from.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was what you said, you felt mortally weak. You realized your mortal weakness, and yet you kept going, so it's not a feeling. I mean, that's the best I can say. I'm not a theologian, but they were right and you were right all at the same time, like you were so strong because you kept going, not because you felt strong and you were doing fine. I mean, there's so much mystery.
Yeah. I keep thinking all these pop culture references. I was thinking about the prophets known as Boston, more than a feeling, right?
Oh yeah, I turned the Boston down just before we started.
That's fitting.
Here in the shop,
and yet the ELO is turned up. I don't know how the balance there. Have you heard of the concept mondegreen? It's a misheard lyric. You go through your whole life thinking a song is saying one thing, then you read the lyrics, you cannot believe that you've been mishearing it. I used to think that Boston song, More Than a Feeling, was more than a feeling that I'm feeling on Sunday, which I don't think is the actual lyric at all.
Yeah, that's why the evangelicals were burning their albums, I think.
I think so, yeah. They didn't have to listen to it backwards, just listen to it forwards. It was kind of disturbing.
My wife's, I'd never heard Mondegreen before, but my wife's that always sticks in my head is the Steve Miller band's Big Old Jed Left His Light On. So Big Old Jed
100%. Yeah, there's a lot of them. You can actually Google it, Mondegreen. What's typically the first, when someone calls your office, hello, Marian Caskets, can I help you? What do people typically first want to know about what you do? Do they go right to price, or do they go? Do you carry? Are you a funeral home, or what's your entry point? What's that first conversation normally like?
Most people, I think, are pretty familiar with what I do before they call, because it's either word of mouth or something like talking to you here. People don't, people don't generally pick up the phone book. There's so much of a kind of channelization with the funeral homes and everything that that's the first call frequently, even before the priest. And to anybody who's watching and listening to this, call your priest first. Don't put them at the subject of the authority of the funeral director. Let the priest be the authority in your funeral. But so there'll already be a familiarity there with what I'm doing. And so, it's generally pretty conversational with people just calling me up. And it's very gratifying because there's a lot of, can you do this? And I really appreciate what you're doing, that kind of thing now. Whereas early on, the phone just didn't ring for a good year or so. So I was building them and donating them and just trying to learn what I was doing, figure it out. But now it feels very familial, actually, with a lot of the calls I get. Like I almost already have a relationship, very much part of the body of Christ in that moment. And because it's such a kind of intimate time, that so many of the distractions and kind of chit chat of the day-to-day life are sort of swept away, and we kind of just go right into the heart, usually of who has died or who is dying, and just an opportunity to meet and pray a little bit and then figure things out from there. But I try to build them for less than any funeral home, and try to make them, simple and elegant, but still very affordable. But price hasn't really been an issue because people early on, people were like, oh, well, can I get it for less than the funeral home? And the answer is yes. But now it's more just because of where their faith life is, or their family member's faith life was, that this is what they want. So I
gotcha.
I'm spared a little bit of that, which is good because I'm not great with the whole business aspect anyway.
Well, speaking of business aspect, we're going to take a little pause, and I want to thank my sponsor that keeps us on the air. So we'll be back in just a moment. Hey there, I just want to take a minute and thank our sponsor, CatholicFundraiser.net. If you go to this URL, CatholicFundraiser.net/coffin, my last name Coffin, that's the keyword coupon that will get you a free copy of the book by the founder of CatholicFundraiser.net, Bryce. Bryce is a fan and a friend of the show. I wish I'd met Bryce earlier. I would have saved a lot of heartache and time, oxygen, and money getting this very show up and running. He has a gift for you. Just pay shipping and handling. The book itself is free. It's called Alms. It's your definitive guide to the ins and outs of Catholic fundraising. If you think fundraising is this terrifying black hole, you don't know where to turn, you don't know what questions to ask, but you've got to raise money for an apostolate or a ministry or a building renovation, doesn't matter. This is the book for you, and it's going to open up all kinds of other doors that you need to open to get you where you need to be, which is the finish line. So go to CatholicFundraiser.net/coffin, get the free book, Alms. You will love it. You're welcome. Back we are with Marcus Daly of MarianCaskets.com. Glad you're joining us on the Patrick Coffin Show. This is kind of inside baseball question, Marcus. Are you seen as kind of a hard-charging competitor to the funeral industry, or is there simpatico, or do they see you as something so unique that you're not really a threat to what they do?
All right, let me think about that. It might be a little mixture of all. I think I'm seen as a competitor by some people. Hard-charging, probably not nearly enough.
Soft-charging, the worst kind.
Yes, yeah. I've had many doors, speaking of soft, from funeral homes. I first went to the funeral homes. I thought, oh, they're going to love this around here, So I went to funeral homes around Seattle, like, it's locally built, it's friendly, environmentally friendly, affordable.
It's green, dude.
It's green. But they have their own business models, their own way of doing things. And so very politely, very gently, door after door was slammed in my face. Very, very politely. I mean, it was.
So you wanted to supply them with caskets.
I thought at first, I'll build them and where do you take a casket? You take it to a funeral home, and then they would be the ones to carry them. But that didn't work out. So the prayer, Jesus, I trust you, this is probably where that sprung from too, was me at midnight, 2:00 in the morning, after I'd burnt the ships to my old landscaping business, thinking, how am I going to provide for 5 children? Well, I felt inspired by this whole thing, but that doesn't mean I had the business aspect down. Mm-hmm. So I would go to the funeral homes, and I came back and told Kelly, I don't know what we're going to do exactly because they don't seem to be interested in this. So that's turned out to be the greatest blessing, though, because that meant that I had to find a way to communicate directly to families that I was doing this. And that means I've formed relationships with families in this very meaningful moment that I just go deep. Even if I don't get to spend a lot of time with people, they go very deep. So instead of being kind of a business-to-business product provider, I get to just know the body of Christ, and I get to talk to people, and sometimes I've been able to attend the funerals when people come out here. So it's not how I foresaw it at all. And it's much more challenging, especially early on, but much richer.
So that's a lesson for anyone listening now or watching who has an entrepreneurial spirit, or they don't think that they do. Sometimes life hands you a hand, using a poker metaphor. You have to play the hand. So the hand you played was door after door after door gets shut. So what bigger door will get open? Voila, Marian Caskets. You literally had to walk into the abyss, right? Talk about a Jesus, I trust in you. At 7 years old, you never dreamed you'd be doing this. And yet, when the floor fell open, it actually was terra firma, because here we are talking about it, and it's successful.
Yeah, and there were definitely moments where I questioned whether I should keep going, but there was just, there were so many good things happening, even if they were spread out. It was so rich. I would go to Kelly and I said, "You wouldn't believe the conversation I had with somebody today," and she would very kindly say, "That's great, but we really, really do need to be able to pay our bills and provide for our kids." So she was supportive.
I can't relate to that conversation at all. Right, it's just this alien thing you're saying. I'm trying to grasp it, but
so she hung in there. And, there were enough of those little stepping stones. Sometimes they were far apart, and sometimes the river was really rushing past. But there were enough of those little stepping stones that we kept going. And so it's getting better and better. And the body mass we're adding to our family is outpacing the growth of the business in some ways, but you can see a pattern after 8 years that gives you a lot more confidence than you have 1 year in.
That's a really good point. And there's a big difference, isn't there, between Jesus, I believe in the creed of your church, or Jesus, I assent to the magisterium, versus Jesus, I trust in you. Different thing.
I've never felt that feeling of an elephant sitting on my chest when I'm praying the creed.
You're right.
I have in the middle of the night.
Gotcha. How long does it take to make a, let's say, standard full-size casket from order to delivery?
About 20 hours. Yeah. And then shipping them, I take them generally, if I'm shipping them around the country, I'll take them to the SeaTac, to the airport, and get them on a plane. So that adds some time too. But my oldest kids are getting to the point where they can help me in the shop a little bit more. And so that's been pretty wonderful also. So that's little things like that. Everything doesn't quite depend on me as much as it did at the beginning. Like somebody can be painting a prayer while I'm doing something else. So that helps.
I can imagine and this maybe has already happened, maybe not. I can imagine someone wanting a personalized casket for someone younger, with like kids doodling, children's art. Am I way off base here? Because I can see that kind of fitting.
You're not.
It just occurred to me now.
Yeah, one of the hardest caskets I had to build was for a friend of mine whose 10-year-old son died tragically, and they wanted they wanted a Divine Mercy casket. So I built them an oak casket with the Divine Mercy prayers carved in it, and then I brought it over to their house the day they were going to have a vigil that night, and I brought it over during the day. And their 5 surviving children, they were all the whole family was in a bit of a daze, obviously. But they had grandparents and things were there helping them out. So there were a lot of people in this house. I brought the casket, and the family, what they did was they wrote messages to their brother, son on there, and then they put paint on their hands, and they put the family's handprints on the sides of the casket. And so they just wanted to obviously just put as much of their family together as they could in that moment. It was heartbreaking and awesome to behold. Yeah.
Any plans to replicate what you do in different cities, or are you always going to be a sort of a solopreneur and willing to ship? Or do you have, because I can see people listening right now. This show is now downloaded in over 90 countries, and I can imagine people overseas wanting to at least find out more. How far do you ship, and do you plan to get bigger and kind of clone yourself?
Yeah, I'm hoping to freeze my brain like Walt Disney.
I'm going to say, cue the Walt Disney joke, yeah.
I have thought about it, because it's been such a wonderful experience for me. I'd love to have young people doing this work, people who are maybe in high school or college, and maybe just graduated from college, discerning a vocation. Am I called to the married life? Am I called to the priesthood? To spend a couple of years learning woodworking, working with their hands amidst something that reminds them that life is a gift. There's a certain amount of time and choices have to be made. I wasn't great at that when I was 22, and I think a lot of people have trouble realizing, that they only have a certain amount of time and they should choose wisely and really work hard and develop skills and see what God is calling them to. So I would love to have, whether it's here or in different places, have an opportunity for sort of internships and maybe 2 or 3 years, maybe paying off student loans so that more opportunities are open to people. But just a time for young people to grow up in a rich atmosphere of contemplation.
Yeah, it is very contemplative. I watched the coffin maker video, which is very well done, by the way. Very lovely, spare. Very quick sidebar. Have you heard of the choral composer Morten Lauridsen?
No.
He's there in the, is it the San Juan Archipelago? I forget which island.
San Juan Islands?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's
no.
the most sung U.S. choral composer. He's your neighbor. I don't know how close it is to Vashon Island, but there's a movie about him, and it's Morten, Morten Lauridsen. I was introduced to him by my guest and good friend, Dana Gioia, who's the Poet Laureate of California. And it's not that they're similar, but that idyllic, I think the word is elegiac, kind of peaceful, connected with nature, with the earth, with things of the earth. Therefore, I was going to say earthy, but now getting into a tautology. But that closeness to the ground and to the simple things of life. Yeah. There's something I can see a young person being attracted to an apprenticeship like that, as in the days of old, right? Because you're sort of the anti-Chinese factory, right? Very personalized TLC that goes into every one of these caskets.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah, it really is. It really is a gift to get to do the work. I'm thanking people. They thank me for providing the casket for them, but I'm thanking them also because there's a beginning and an end. It's a definite project, so it doesn't have to go on forever. So there's satisfaction that comes from the completion, but then every one has not just the uniqueness of the wood or the grain, the way the wood behaves or things, but the person that I'm building it for. So, all that is packed in there to really expand out the aspect of doing something, like you say, that's simple. So it frees you up in a way. I guess that's what I say about there's a beginning and an end. Yeah. You're fairly free to consider other things. I mean, you have to focus, but because it's the same basic structure each time, you can get good at it. You can get the satisfaction. You can have the satisfaction of improving on something and have the kind of freedom to consider other things while you're doing it. Yeah. And there's some very obvious things to consider while you're building a coffin. Like
praying for the deceased. Ora et labora. It's just right there. Your kids' friends ever make comments? So what'd your dad do? Well, come on over to the workshop.
It's a pretty intimate little community on Vashon. So everybody saw the sort of wild-eyed enthusiast that I was 8 years ago. And now it's more like, wow, we're glad you're actually getting the word out more on those so that we don't have to just hear about what you're going to do, but you're actually doing it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they're still pretty young. So it's most of my kids and their friends have grown up, are growing up around it. So it hasn't been startling. Maybe if somebody brings a possible future spouse home from college someday, it'll give me some leverage with any young men.
Right. Well, cue the Munsters joke, How many a year do you make, Marcus? What's
I'm going to make about 1 or 2 a week.
1 or 2 a week. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's all the administrative aspects of having your own business too. Yeah. So right now, my wife is feeling crummy with the pregnancy. So I'm also pretty much cooking and cleaning with some help from my children. So I'm out here till 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning right now. So I look forward to her feeling better and having a more regular schedule. But people are calling, and I hate to say no because it's a huge privilege.
Well, I'll put it venally. It is a great business model. Like my mother used to say, the funeral business and the underwear business. There's always going to be someone around the corner who needs what you provide. I think the difference here is the transcendent aspect, the faith depth that you bring as a Christian to families who are hurting. Do you have any anecdotes, Marcus, about someone who was a family member who was touched by grace through one of your caskets and the whole experience that you provide? Any stories come to mind offhand?
Well, I get lots of thank you notes and People have even sent me gifts, rosaries that they've made. The man I built the casket for, who was the Air Force, the war hero,
The Korea guy.
the Korea guy. Yeah, he sent me an iPod with like 1,000 of his favorite songs in it and musical pieces to listen to while I was working on his casket. So everything from ABBA to whatever the opposite end of the spectrum is. I'm not good with classical music, but there's a lot of that on there.
Ozzy Osbourne, I believe. Yeah.
A to Z.
A to Z, yes.
There's two Z's, so even though doesn't start with it. But
wow, that's interesting. So
yeah. So people, there's a richness that happens there, and then I get lots of very nice cards from people and words. So I remember last spring, there was a lady in Great Falls, Great Falls, Montana, whose husband died. And she called me when he was dying to build a Divine Mercy oak casket. And I did, and I set it up with Delta Airlines. I have Delta Cargo ship into the city, and then I have a local delivery service pick them up and deliver them. And by the way, that would be a fun thing, I think, to develop relationships with people around the country and cities. If anybody wanted to participate in a corporal work of mercy who is watching this, if I shipped it to that airport and then, lots of people with big family vans and things like that wanted to deliver it to the funeral home, I would love to work with people that way and have that sort of a personal touch. But so this one was going to Great Falls, Montana, and I got a call. The man died, and his funeral was 2 days later. And I got a call from Delta saying, "Oh, we were wrong. The planes that fly into Great Falls are too small to carry your casket." So the funeral was in 2 days. So I just got that call, and like 5 minutes later, I went inside and said, "Kelly, I'm driving to Great Falls, Montana. I'll see you in 3 days." And so
you drove it? Yeah,
it was 12 hours. And the spring along rivers, so there were lots and lots of bugs on my windshield too, making that trip. But the family, I got there and I got to the hotel that I was going to stay at that night, and there was like this big gift basket with all sorts of energy drinks and things in it for me from the family that I was delivering it to. And I was able to meet them the next day at the funeral home. And this happens to me a lot now, which is that families will, if local deliveries, if families will tell me they're going to, or just surprise me that they're at the funeral home when I'm delivering the casket, because it is such an intimate thing. Yeah. So frequently I get to even embrace, the spouses or the children of the people who are going to be buried in my caskets. So, I definitely wouldn't have had that if I was taking them and just dropping them off by the gross at the funeral home.
Do you get ahead of your own curve? Or are you just working constantly so that if something, God forbid, you have a need for 10 all at once, that you would be ready? Or are you kind of the supply and the need, the supply and the demand rather, are more or less neck and neck, that you're not feeling like you're trying to get ahead of a forest threshing machine? Does that make sense? Yeah,
I try to get ahead. Right now things are pretty neck and neck because of the family situation we have, and so there have been times where I have a few built and ready to go, but it's frequently neck and neck too. I would love to have more ready to go. People will even order from me ahead of time so that, in 5 years or 10 years, it can be delivered, but I have a limited amount of storage space for that. So I'm working on those logistical challenges. But yeah, there's been many, many times that I've stayed up all night, even 2 nights in a row, trying to get the work done. And boy, that's not contemplation at that point. When it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you've been awake for 40 hours, that's hallucination. That's a whole different deal. Yeah. I almost put a banana peel on my head when I was delivering a casket to Anacortes, Washington, because I was driving, which maybe wasn't the greatest idea. Driving, and I'd been awake building this casket, and I was pulling into the funeral home. So I was fumbling around with my hand, keeping my eyes on the road to pick up the hat. And I picked up a banana peel because I had breakfast on the go when I was in there. And
things happen.
I got about a foot away from my head with it before I realized it wasn't my hat. So that might have been the thing that the funeral homes really needed to see to know I was no threat whatsoever, was me walking in with a banana peel on my head.
Well, it could have been a false apparition, the famous banana deception. That reminds me of Dr. Oliver Sacks's book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. You're the man who mistook his hat for a banana. So that's devotion. That's true exhaustion. How far will you ship your caskets?
Canada is the farthest I've shipped them. I don't have the whole international logistics down very well, but all over the East Coast. They've been up and down the East Coast and around the country.
Well, Marcus, I hope people listening and watching now take heed to your idea of pickup at the airport. I know there's a whole army of Catholic listeners with large families that have that famous white Econo line vehicle. And also, I think the apprentice idea is wonderful, because you need to clone you within the limits of magisterial teaching. I'm cloning, of course, because I think the need is great, and anything I can do to help spread the word. I don't imagine that you do or have a need to do much advertising, right? Just talking to folks like me and word of mouth there locally is probably already jet fuel enough. Am I right?
Largely. I mean, I would like to spread the word more, because I hear even more than I hear thank you. I wish I would have known, because there is the whole funeral industry. So you're talking about underwear and coffins. The difference between the two industries is there's not a whole fraternity of people who sell underwear who know how to drain all the fluid out of your body in 22 minutes.
Well, poetically said, Marcus. Yeah.
Thank you.
It makes sense.
So,
all right, yeah.
So I appreciate it. Thank you, Patrick.
All right. The website is mariancaskets.com. Thanks again. Godspeed, Marcus. I hope to connect soon. And I really appreciate you carving some time out to be with us today.
It's great to be with you. Thanks, Patrick.
This is The Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?